I'm 80 years old now. People think by this age you finally understand who you became. But the truth is, I don't. I look back and don't see one clear story. I see a series of almost versions of myself that appeared for a while, then quietly stepped aside. I wasn't lost. I wasn't lazy. I was always becoming, never staying long enough to know. Even now, some nights, I wonder who I was becoming when time decided for me. I'm 80 years old, and some nights I lie awake wondering who I was becoming all those years. I thought I still had time. Not who I was or who I am now, but the person I kept moving toward without ever fully meeting. I assumed clarity would arrive with age, that one day I'd recognize myself completely. Instead, I'm left with questions that aged quietly alongside me. When I was younger, I thought identity was something you eventually reached, a finished version waiting at the end of effort and patience. I kept telling myself I was still in progress, still learning, still becoming. Decades passed under that belief. Now looking back, I realize how often I postponed understanding myself, convinced there would always be another chapter to explain everything. I made choices that felt temporary at the time. Jobs I didn't love but stayed in. Relationships I assumed would evolve into something clearer. Habits I promised myself I'd outgrow. Each decision felt small, harmless on its own. Together they formed a life. I didn't notice it happening. Becoming doesn't announce itself. It happens quietly while you're busy waiting for certainty. There were moments when I felt close to understanding myself. The brief flashes of confidence, purpose, direction. They never lasted. I told myself that was normal, that no one feels settled forever. What I didn't admit was how much I relied on that uncertainty to avoid making harder decisions. As long as I was still becoming, I didn't have to commit to who I truly was. I often wonder if I mistook movement for progress. I stayed busy, productive, responsible. From the outside, my life looked steady. Inside, I felt unfinished. I assumed that feeling would disappear once I reached a certain age or milestone. Instead, it followed me, changing shape but never leaving, like a question I kept pushing aside because it felt too large to answer. At 80, time feels different, not rushed, just more honest. There's less room to pretend the future will resolve everything. I look back and see a man who was always preparing for the next version of himself without fully inhabiting the one he already was. That realization doesn't come with panic. It comes with a quiet heaviness I carry through my days. People knew me by roles: worker, partner, parent, friend. Those labels fit well enough, but they never captured the whole of me. I don't blame anyone for that. I rarely showed the parts of myself that felt uncertain or unfinished. I learned early how to appear composed, even when I didn't feel fully formed inside. Sometimes I think about the dreams I once described as not yet. I assumed there would be time to return to them when life slowed down. Life didn't slow down the way I expected. It just kept moving, carrying me forward while those dreams stayed where I left them, waiting quietly until they faded from view. I don't feel regret the way people imagine it. There's no sharp pain or dramatic sorrow. It's softer than that. A gentle wondering that shows up in ordinary moments, sitting alone, watching others talk about who they're becoming. I listen carefully, not with envy, but with recognition of a question I never fully answered. At this age, I'm not searching for reinvention. I'm searching for understanding. I want to know whether the person I became was shaped by intention or by hesitation, whether my uncertainty protected me or quietly limited me. These thoughts don't demand resolution. They sit with me steady and unresolved as I continue to live inside the life I built while becoming. I used to believe that uncertainty meant I was thoughtful, that questioning myself made me deeper somehow. But now I see how often it kept me from choosing. I stayed in the middle between decisions, because the middle felt safer. As long as I was undecided, I didn't have to face the risk of committing to a version of myself that might fail or disappoint. There were people who tried to see me clearly, who asked what I wanted or where I was going. I often gave careful answers instead of honest ones. Not lies, just softened truths. I didn't want to sound unsure, yet over time, those conversations stopped happening, and I accepted that quiet as something natural, even though it was something I allowed. Looking back, I notice how often I waited for permission from time, from circumstances, from other people's expectations. I thought maturity meant patience. I didn't realize how easily patience can turn into avoidance. Years passed without any single mistake, just a long series of moments where I chose comfort over clarity. I became good at fulfilling responsibilities. I showed up, I did what was asked of me. People trusted me, relied on me. That part of my life feels solid. What feels fragile is the space where my own desires should have lived. I rarely asked myself what I wanted if no one else was watching or depending on me. Sometimes I imagined the person I might have been if I had answered myself more honestly earlier. Not a better man, just a clearer one. Someone less concerned with being acceptable and more willing to be specific. That imagined version doesn't haunt me. He simply visits occasionally, reminding me that becoming is shaped as much by hesitation as by action. At 80, I no longer expect a final explanation to arrive. There is no moment where everything lines up neatly. Life didn't build toward a single reveal. It unfolded in fragments, and I participated unevenly. Accepting that has brought a strange calm mixed with sadness, but also relief from the pressure to finally figure everything out. I see now that I often confused flexibility with openness. I adapted easily, changed directions when needed, blended into different roles. That skill helped me survive, but it also blurred my edges. Over time, I stopped noticing where adaptation ended and self-erasure began. The line was thin, and I crossed it quietly. There were chances I recognized only after they passed. Not dramatic turning points, just small openings that required confidence. I didn't yet feel. I told myself I'd be ready next time. Eventually, next time became a habit, and readiness became something I always expected but rarely claimed. I don't feel angry with my younger self. He did what he could with the understanding he had, but I do feel a tenderness toward him. He carried questions without answers and assumed time would be generous. He didn't know how quickly days turn into decades when you're focused on becoming instead of being. Now, when I ask who I was becoming, I don't expect a clear response. The question itself has become part of me. It follows me gently, not demanding resolution. I live with it the way I live with my age, aware, reflective, and quieter than before, still moving forward without fully knowing toward what. When I was younger, I thought identity was something you arrived at, like a destination. I believed one day I would wake up, certain, settled into myself. That day never came. Instead, I kept waking up as someone slightly unfinished. At 80, I understand now that becoming isn't a phase you complete. It's something that lingers even when the body slows down. I spent years studying other people for clues. I watched how they spoke, how they chose, how confidently they stood inside their lives. I assumed they knew something. I didn't. Only later did I realize most of us were quietly improvising, pretending our certainty was real. By the time I learned that, I had already practiced doubt far more than trust in myself. There were moments when I felt close to clarity, brief flashes where something inside me hardened into truth. But those moments scared me. Clarity demands action, and action exposes you. So I often softened those truths until they fit neatly back into my routines. I told myself I was being practical, when really I was protecting myself from visibility. Age has taken many things from me, but it has given me honesty. I no longer feel the need to explain my choices or justify my silences. What remains is a quieter assessment of who I was becoming and how gently I resisted that process. The resistance wasn't loud. It looked responsible, polite, and reasonable, which made it harder to recognize. I realize now that becoming requires a certain willingness to disappoint. To choose one direction is to disappoint all the others. I avoided that discomfort for most of my life. I wanted to be agreeable, reliable, easy to understand. In doing so, I postponed the deeper work of standing firmly inside my own contradictions. Sometimes people asked if I regret not becoming more. I never know how to answer. I became enough to live a life, to be useful, to be remembered kindly. But there is a difference between living a life and inhabiting it fully. That difference is subtle, and you usually notice it only when there is more behind you than ahead. I think many of us confuse motion with progress. I stayed busy for decades, always doing something, always moving forward on paper. Yet becoming isn't measured by movement alone. It's measured by alignment, how closely your actions resemble the person you feel yourself to be when no one is asking anything of you. If there is wisdom in reaching 80 with questions intact, it is this: uncertainty is not a flaw, but avoidance is a habit. One invites curiosity, the other quietly steals time. I lived with both, often mistaking one for the other. Understanding that difference now doesn't change the past, but it softens how I carry it. I no longer chase a version of myself that never existed. I sit with the man I became through choices made and choices delayed. He is imperfect, cautious, reflective. He is also real. There is a strange peace in finally meeting yourself without the pressure to improve or explain who you are. At 80, I've learned this much. I didn't fail to become someone. I became many small versions of myself, and each one carried me a little further than the last. Some faded too soon. Some stayed longer than they should have, but they were all real. And when the wandering gets heavy, I remind myself that becoming doesn't always end in answers. Sometimes it ends quietly, with acceptance, and that has to be enough.